My name is Kari Ginger, and I am the host of Know Better, Live Best. My guest today is no stranger to the podcast. Alex Uding is back on today to discuss stress and its effect on the body. We also dug in a little bit about food and nutrition and the role it plays on gut health. Listen in to learn more self-care tips. Know Better, Live Best is dedicated to supporting food and health literacy in people of all ages. Our mission is to cut through the misinformation surrounding food, health, and nutrition because we believe that when people know better, they can make the right choices and live their best lives. We are presented by Bytable Foods. They use blockchain and Internet of Things technology to build traceable, transparent food systems because it shouldn't take an investigative journalist to find out where food comes from. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Alex Uding today. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. Well, last week I was talking with Sherilyn Nicholas, and she's a clinical therapist. And a lot of what we were talking about kept coming back to stress a lot. It wasn't everything, but it was definitely something that stuck out to me, and I'm sure to the listeners as well. So I thought this week it might be kind of interesting to talk to you about what you think about stress and maybe how you see it in your field. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Looking forward to it. And I think the timing's great with the start of school, everyone's routines changing. It can be a little bit stressful for people. So hopefully we can help give some tips to make stress a little bit easier and better understand stress so we can have strategies to help our own lives.
Oh yeah, that's how I'm feeling right now. Start of school, all these activities starting, but no, all good things, but stress is pretty easy to feel and I think succumb to. So I think we all know what stress is, but how would you define stress?
Yep. So stress is our reaction to a challenge or demand. It can be triggered externally or internally. So those forces then can put an impact on how we're feeling physically or emotionally. So some external influencers of stress might be the environment. It could be our communication or other people we're talking to. So relationships, challenges, things like that. So we think, you're walking in the dark, you hear a rustle of the bush, you get nervous. So that obviously is a stressful situation. So we respond to that. Or you're stuck in traffic, same kind of thing. You're annoyed by other people. You're not going anywhere. You're thinking where you need to be. So those are external triggers of stress. And then we've got internal ones. And that can be our emotional well-being and kind of like our mental state. It could be our general health. It could be how in shape we are and like our exercise and stuff like that. So nutrition also can influence it. So we've got internal triggers as well. So if you think you're really, really tired, you didn't sleep well the night before, that next day might be a little more stressful. You might be worried because you're not well rested. You're not thinking as straight. And so that can make us stressed out. Or if you're really busy, your mind's racing about stuff and you're trying to sleep and you can't, that can trigger stress. So it's this really unique thing where it can come from the outside or inside, and then how our body reacts then produces how we react physically or mentally. And so I think a big thing is stress does not have to be a bad thing. I think it gets this really bad connotation. Right. But stress can actually be very beneficial to us. From an evolution standpoint, we would not have adapted and changed through the years had we not responded to stressors in certain ways. So we needed to change. And when we think from a personal level, like big life events that impacted us and that caused us to grow as a person or change as a person, we go back to those and kind of think of the situation at the time, there's a pretty good chance some sort of stress was associated with it.
Right.
So it can be a very good and productive thing, but at the same time, it can turn into a negative thing because it does elicit certain responses, and too much of one thing takes us too far from the balance of where we should be.
Right. I like how you kind of put a positive spin on that, though, because I think when I hear of stress, it's always negative, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm one of the only ones, but I hear stress, I'm like, oh, you're stressed, how can we help you? Or I'm stressed, how can I help myself? But that is interesting. I think about, you mentioned like you're walking somewhere maybe by yourself and it's dark. That'd be a good stress, I think, response, maybe hopefully to make you more aware, to keep you safe. But I also know when I'm laying in bed, that's when a lot of my stress comes, because I'm laying there thinking of everything I have to do or everything I didn't get done. And then you wake up in the morning and I think, at least with me, I instantly feel better. My to-do list didn't change overnight. I clearly didn't do anything while I was sleeping. But the morning time I feel better. But I know nighttime when I'm lying in bed, stress just kind of starts piling on if I let it pretty easily. So like how does the body respond to stress?
Yep. So it's kind of like what you said, when there's a threat, our body should be able to react. And so from kind of like just basic being able to live standpoint, the brain's job is to make sure that Kari is alive, that she's safe, that nothing's bad is going to happen to her. Like on a very basic level, that's what the brain's trying to achieve. And so when there is some sort of threat that the body perceives, we go into this chain reaction. And so what happens is the brain gets signaled that something's going on. And so our heart rate will go up, our blood pressure goes up, blood flow to our bigger muscles starts to go up. And so all of that's preparing us in case we have to react in some way, we're ready to go. And so in addition to that, we start breaking down our sugars. So we've got energy. We start breathing a little bit heavier or a little bit more quickly again. So then we have oxygen available. And so it just becomes this cycle of, all right, I'm ready to react and I'm going to respond in whatever way I can. And that kind of happens through the release of certain hormones and the connections through certain nerves and things like that.
Our body really is amazing.
Yeah.
You think about all the things it's designed to do to help us. So I feel like we're really hurting ourselves when we go down the wrong path, because I think our body is made to deal with a lot of things. Like nowadays, there's a lot more on our plates, I know. And so I think we're adapting in that way, like you said, to the stress, and we need to learn to adapt, because as we're evolving, I think all of our lives are getting busier. So that is important, but it is amazing to kind of hear that.
Yeah. And so, and I think we can think of it when there's like a situation that's scary. Like if we think back to a time like where we felt really uncomfortable, we can kind of think through and be like, oh yeah, my heart was racing. I did notice I started breathing heavier and those kinds of things. And in today's society, I think the threats that initially our human body was made to endure are very different. So we're not being chased by animals. We're not constantly on the go, things like that. So the response seems sometimes a little dramatic when we think to like what our stressor might be. Like, you know, if you're giving a presentation, nothing's going to happen. But that's still our response because that's our innate functioning for it to happen. And so things can kind of go wrong when that response doesn't shut off. So a healthy stress response is you go through those things, but you're able to turn it off when either the threat dissipates or you master kind of like an understanding of the situation and you can calm yourself down. But if you can't, it can become more cyclical in nature, and certain reactions continue, and it causes big changes to the body. And we can talk about those if you want. It's kind of...
Yeah. No, I think it's important because with me, I'm the typical, I think, everyday person. You know, I have a job, I have other activities, I have other responsibilities. People expect things of you just like everyone else I know. But I also know when I'm being a little too silly, and I can calm myself down. I can bring myself back to a point where I'm okay. Life's good. Think about all your blessings, everything you have, and that's great. But there are people that can't do that for numerous reasons. What happens when stress becomes more chronic?
So when stress starts to become more chronic, like I said, our heart rate goes up. So one of our responses is our blood pressure starts to stay higher because you're not coming down from that. So initially we were meant to have our blood pressure go up, but it's not coming down because we're constantly being triggered. So blood pressure goes up. That's why a lot of people you hear stress can be the cause of a heart attack. And it's true because over time, our blood pressure's up, our heart rate is up. The arteries that are pumping blood to our bigger muscles are constantly being used, that even the arterial responsiveness kind of changes. And so that can cause some stress. So that can become problematic. Breathing. We think when people have panic attacks, the big thing is they feel like they can't breathe. And so when you become hyper responsive to stressors and it's happening all the time, you feel like you can't breathe and you feel like you're being crushed. So panic attacks can happen. There's a really strong association between muscle tension and prolonged stress. So if we kind of think of tension headaches, or people wake up because they're grinding their teeth and they have like jaw pain, the prolonged tension that we feel, because muscles have to turn on during stress, so they create tension, but excessive generation of tension can make our muscles not respond the way they're supposed to. And so then they're not working well. And so either we can get weak because they're constantly turned on, they don't get a chance to actually relax and adapt to the change. So we can get weaker, or we can feel stiffer in certain muscles because they're not moving because they're always on. So it can kind of manifest into several things. And then a lot of times, digestive stuff can also result as well. So because when we respond to stress, our digestive system doesn't want you to feel hungry when you're responding to the text or to the threat. And so we don't search food, right? But certain hormones with stress make increased appetite. So it's this really weird effect. Some people, when they're stressed out, they don't want to eat. So that's kind of that effect. Other people, their appetite increases. And it's because we release a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol increases our appetite. And so for prolonged release of cortisol, we then are looking for food because we think we're breaking down food really fast because we're turning to those things. So the increased cortisol increases appetite. And a really interesting thing with that is we start getting cravings. And so we start to crave fatty and sugary foods. And so, and we think of comfort foods, right? So we think of like, oh, I want the pasta and I want bread and sweets and things like that when we're stressed out. And it's because those foods actually help to bring down some of our stress hormones. So they become comfort foods for a reason, because they bring down our stress hormone levels. But we know those foods are tend to be unhealthy.
Right.
So too much of those foods then can result in weight gain because we're turning to some of that. So.
Which I think can add more stress.
Yeah, exactly.
On the scale, unless their point is to gain weight, obviously, because I know there are people out there that would like to gain weight, but that adds more stress. Sometimes just the idea of stepping on the scale, if you know you've like maybe had a bad night or like a bad week, you're like, oh, I know I should step on this to, keep me in check, but they'll give more stress to the comfort foods. But you're right, it's the comfort foods that make you feel better. That's why you keep eating them.
Right. So exactly. It just becomes this vicious cycle that's really hard to break. And I think the biggest thing becomes when we've been through stress enough, what we interpret as a threat goes down. So we become very sensitive to everything. So things that weren't stressing us out before are now stressing us out. And so it becomes, again, more cyclical in nature, that we're responding to things that shouldn't elicit these responses, but they are. And so it's learning to kind of break that so we don't become so sensitive to the different things around us. So I think a lot of times the people who do feel stuck in this hole of stress, they're struggling because it's really hard to break, and it's hard now to see what's stressful and what's not stressful. And it's definitely not their fault. And I don't think it's something we kind of talk about enough, about like, what are the avenues we can use then to help start to kind of regulate and bring us down from that cycle. Because you know what, if you're stressed all the time, you're probably not sleeping, because we're more restless when it happens. Pain levels for a lot of people, their interpretation of pain starts to go up, so they don't want to move as much, or they're afraid to move. So they stop exercising, they stop participating. And when they stop participating, they're not interacting with people. And then they feel isolated, and then they get depressed, and it just becomes so big, and it's so hard for one person to kind of take on all that by themselves. And so I think this conversation is really important.
It is important, because I think it's how you, like you said, how you perceive life. It may not be as bad as what you're seeing, but you don't know how to change that, because in your mind, that is how you're seeing it. And when it comes to eating, it's funny, just to apply it to my own life. With stress, I'm like, oh, I guess I am a stress eater. But when I'm busy, when my stress is like, I just have too much on my plate, I tend to want to, I have that in check, so I'm aware of that now. But then I also have that response of not being hungry when it's a bigger life event. Like if it's something that's causing me stress because I'm really sad or I'm really worried about someone, that causes me to not eat. But if it's like busy stress, I'm like, I don't have time, I'm just going to eat this. That's when I tend to like overeat when it comes to just being busy. So it's funny how I do have both responses, and I'm sure most people can relate to that. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is very normal for a lot of people. And I think the other thing that's really important to kind of talk about is no two people's response to stress is the same. And so, you know, what one person can tolerate from a stress perspective might be different than another person's, or what triggers it might be different as well. And so some of the manifestations and things that happen after that also become very person dependent, depending what their past life experiences are, depending you know, their health status, depending what foods they have access to and things like that. So stress is common amongst a lot of people, but how they manage it and control it and what their triggers are can be very, very different.
Well, and I think too, what is your community life, or what is your like tribe? Like, what do you have around you that can help you? Like, I'm pretty lucky to have all of my family in town and a great husband. And so I have lots of help. And I know that helps a ton with my stress. Because if I need to do something, I have people that can watch my kids like a drop of a dime. And that takes off loads of stress. But I think about my friends, whether they need to get a dog sitter or a sitter for their children, or they just need someone around to listen to, like in person, and they don't have that. So I think that plays a role.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, when we look at the risk factors for stress, you're going to find time and time again in the literature is the community around them and the support people have around them to turn to during stressful times. So I think it's wonderful that you have that, and it's making sure people who aren't sure of what communities are out there or what they have available to them, that we get resources out there so they know they're not alone and can build a tribe around them and stuff like that. So I think in terms of getting support, talking, and opening up, it's really important, since we mentioned before a big trigger to stress is feelings of being overwhelmed and feelings of where circumstances are changing. It's during times of change, a lot of people feel stress. And so it's like, who can I turn to and talk to and be heard and just feel like I'm not alone in the process, so it doesn't trigger feelings of depression or anxiety or sadness and things like that. And I think especially for kids, it becomes important because there's a lot of changes, especially during the teenage years, where so much is going on. They're changing physically, school structure is changing, social groups are changing. And so understanding that turning to community and talking is a big predictor of how you manage stress. And studies have shown how people handle stress in their youth actually has big impact on their adulthood too. And so developing these skills early could be really, really helpful and really change their health as a whole, not just how they get through the immediate times, but it's going to have impact later. And it's really important that we know that now.
I think all caregivers, parents, teachers, anyone that works with youth, or even if you're just around them, I think it's important to know how to help them deal with stress. Because I already know kids nowadays have more stress. I mean, different, but I would say, excuse me, busier. And I talk with Cheryl Nicholas about this. There's more social media, and there's a lot of things out there that I think can cause our youth stress nowadays that we didn't have to deal with. I know I wasn't asking my mom for a phone. Like I said in the last podcast, I'm pretty sure I got my flip phone when I was 18. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it's just talking with the children, helping them through social situations. How do you respond when you win or lose? It's just having that healthy mind, and that is so important. I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy that I'm aware for my own children and all the children that I come in contact with. And we've talked before in the past about the growth mindset and how do you deal when things are tough. Because if they can learn, like you said, now they have an easier time as they get older in the teen years, where things really, I think, get stressful. And that's just a hard time in life. And high school, I think after high school, it tends, not for everyone, it tends to get a little easier because you're more confident in yourself. But oh my gosh, we need to help our children now. That when they grow up, they hopefully have, that stronger mind, and they have what they need to make better choices in these situations. But that's also a whole other podcast. There's a lot more that goes into just helping them through situations, because there's a lot of risk factors out there for children. That's not just helping them through stress, but
no, but it's a great point, and kind of what you're speaking to speaks to like kind of the shift of what triggers are these days. It's just so different than if we talk to an older generation where their stressors were much different. And so it's making sure that as we grow and society changes and the stressors that are impacting people's lives, that the skills that we develop and the coping mechanisms that we have also address those. So sometimes, like I know if I talked to my grandpa, he'd just be like, suck it up. Like, you just work through it. The answer was like, never stop moving, always work hard. And maybe that worked for the demands then, but some of our kids, it's a different demand now. And so it's just making sure that our strategies continue to change, that we continue studying and finding the research and things to help, society as we continue to change and our stresses change.
It is a different demand, and just the understanding of people. Just because your friend finds something difficult and you don't, doesn't mean they're weaker, because I guarantee there's something that you find difficult that they don't. It's just being understanding of all situations and just being there for people and just being a listening ear, I think, because we all have stress in our lives. And I think if anyone said they didn't, either they're lying or they're not challenging themselves in any way or committing to anything. But it was kind of funny, you're talking about the changes, like, talking to your grandfather. I just laugh. It's not a big deal, but it just makes me laugh. My dad has a flip phone still to this day, and he will never change. He'll always have a flip phone. And people will text him every now and then, and he gets stressed. He's like, why are people texting me? I'm like, yeah, that's like kind of the way of life now. Like, it's normal. They actually think they're being kind and not calling you.
Exactly.
He's like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah. Yep. So that's all right. If you don't want to text, just call them and just say, I don't text. But it's funny what we perceive as a text might be easier for us. But the generations, it's just, analogy there really, but how we perceive things.
Exactly. And it goes
changing.
Yeah. And it just goes back to that perception of stuff. Like, you now recognize that stresses him out. Right. So it can help also guide our communication skills as well. When we understand what people's stressors are, it can help us better direct our actions and what we can do to help others to eliminate their stress. Since we are part of their support group and we're part of the people that they turn to, we know that the environment triggers stress. So if I'm not acting in a way that is good for you and it's causing you stress, the more we interact, and you can tell me like, hey, the way you approach this really stressed me out, I then can adjust my communication skills. Just like with your dad, it's like, okay, I'm not going to bother to text him this time. I'm just going to call him. It'll make his life easier. And so when we understand people's stressors, it can also improve just communication between people as well.
And it shows you care too, but you're willing to make that change. But it is hard to, I think, approach someone and tell them that you don't like what they're doing. But it's how you communicate that can make it easier sometimes. And that's like I said, probably a whole nother it's all how we deal with people and communication. Yep. But you mentioned risk factor to chronic stress can also be, our gut health can cause that too. Can you go into a little more detail about that?
Yeah, so our gut, it's really interesting. They call it the second brain. And so there's a really strong connection between our brain and our gut. It's connected by the nervous system. And then we also create certain neurotransmitters in our gut as well. So there's a really strong relationship between first of all, what we're eating and how it can impact the way we're thinking, how we're living and things like that, but also not only what we're eating, but the makeup of what's in our gut. So we have bacteria in our gut. And so it helps us to process food and helps to keep us healthy, right? So make sure that everything we're taking in is being processed and excreted appropriately. And so sometimes when gut health becomes unbalanced, it can actually impact our mood and depression and anxiety. So there's like a few different things that can kind of impact it. So one thing we know is, like, for example, when you get butterflies in your stomach, right? That's the perfect example of that connection, right? The brain is nervous for whatever reason or anxious for whatever reason, and we feel it in our stomach. Or, for example, have you ever heard of leaky gut?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so leaky gut happens when, for whatever reason, the gut becomes more permeable. We see this a lot post-pregnancy, for example. So you have the baby, you've been fueling the baby the entire pregnancy, you're connected, and so you've been giving nutrients to it. And a lot of times afterwards, the gut, after pregnancy, because it's been used to fueling another human, it can become more leaky. And so when it becomes leaky and the nutrients start to go through the wall of the gut, it can leak then toxins, or it can, we then can't form like the gut bacteria that we need to keep a healthy gut. And so the leaking of toxins, you can imagine, toxins go in the body, those toxins then can cause depression, they can cause anxiety, things like that. So actually an unhealthy gut can contribute to some of the depression and anxiety that people feel. And certain kind of doing, and again, like this is very basic level, like if you want to talk to like a nutritionist or a dietitian or your doctor about it. But that's why a lot of depression is being treated through nutrition and stuff like that, because they're finding this relationship that it's not only necessarily something that's going on in the brain, it could be contributed to something going on in the gut as well. And so we think postpartum depression, is that a gut thing? Is it a brain thing? Is it a both thing? And so they're doing a lot of research on the relationship of gut health to the brain, because of the fact that they're finding when the gut is operating well, people tend to feel better. And when it's not, people tend to feel worse. And so it's this big line of research that is happening right now. And they're finding success with it. So, you know, the big probiotic kick that everyone's on, the reason is it's stemming from this concept of it. Can we keep our gut health up and the bacteria in our gut that breaks down food appropriate, because it can help our overall hormone levels and feelings.
No, that's big stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I've heard of the gut and how it can affect your overall well-being, that part, you know, I feel like I knew. But with postpartum depression, that's really interesting. I didn't realize leaky gut was more prevalent after having children. And I'm trying to think back to my three. My first one, I think I had a slight case of postpartum depression, but it kicked in when he didn't want to go to bed at night, but like my husband would say to get up really early. And so I'd stay up, and it was like almost like this anxiety that would come, and then morning it'd be fine again. And I didn't have that with my other two. And I would think with my first, I really was not in a healthy eating cycle at all. I mean, I didn't go to like fast food every day, but I know I could have been better. And my middle child, I was eating a little better at that point, but not great. And then with my last, I just had last year, it's interesting. She was the most stressful pregnancy because of my back that I've talked about in my other podcasts. And I was stuck in bed, but I was eating really well. I made sure like my husband or anyone around that was bringing me food, because I was in bed, that it was whole foods. And I had leaned towards the plant-based for me. And I'm amazed how well I handled everything. And now I'm thinking about it. I was feeding my body what I needed. I was hoping just to bring down inflammation, but I bet it helped my overall well-being in general, because I didn't have any postpartum depression at all. And I feel like that would have been a really easy one to do that with, because I couldn't take care of her. I couldn't take care of my other kids. I was stuck in bed. I wasn't able to go back to work like I had planned, and all these different things. And I probably have to attribute some of that. I mean, a lot of it's to like my tribe, as I'll call it, with family and everyone helping me out. That goes a long way, and I'll never say they didn't. But, you know, I was really eating well throughout the pregnancy and during that time. And I know that had to have played a huge role in that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great story. And thanks for sharing it, because I think it's so important, because it highlights a lot of things. Like, there were a lot of stressors that you mentioned, like the work, and that things weren't going to plan. You were fearful with your back. Like all those things had the potential to kind of influence and make the situation much more stressful. And you took control of what you could. You turned to your family. You started eating really good foods. And one thing we know, when we get the right foods in us, gut microbes help to release serotonin, which make us a little bit happier. They help to release certain neurotransmitters that have to do with fear and anxiety. So if our microbes are doing their job, we're not going to be as anxious or fearful. And then with the leaky gut, when it's not leaking because we're putting certain foods into it, and I can talk about that later if you want.
Okay.
When it's not leaking, you're not going to have as much inflammation. So inflammation levels are going to go down. So it just becomes, like, again, like everything we've talked about so far, just a cyclical effect of it. We can attack stress from many different ways, and nutrition can be just a really, really great way to just kind of fortify our resiliency.
Oh my gosh, nutrition. I wish I would have had this a long time ago, but I don't know if I would have. I think sometimes it takes life to get in the way, so to speak, of bringing you down a path you want. I'm sure most people, now maybe you grew up in a family where they were perfectly healthy. I think that's really hard nowadays. I know my parents did the best they could, just like I'm doing the best I can for my kids, which, a lot of feels there. But I think you need to take control, and you need to have like your why behind it. You would think our why would be, well, it's our body. We should treat it well. And for some reason that doesn't work for me. And I know it doesn't work for many people. It feels like it's something that brings you down that path. But oh my gosh, nutrition plays a role in every aspect of your life. Like, I couldn't work out for the longest time, and I still lost all of my baby weight plus some, which did not happen with my first two. And I was hardly moving. I'm still working back into that, and I'm doing a good job of that, but I was losing weight. I was feeling better, and I wasn't going for runs. I wasn't on the elliptical yet. I am now, because I think that's another important part of well-being, is being in shape and gaining muscle. But wow, nutrition is just like, it's food is medicine, like they say. It really, truly is. It's just something that is so important. Stress. I think I probably would go mad sometimes if I wasn't eating the way I was, because I can see how people go down that path, and it's not easy to eat healthy majority of the time. Now, I think you still need to have some indulgences, or you can crash and burn pretty hard. You need to allow yourself that sometimes, but wow, everyone I talk to, and the more I'm learning, I think it's just amazing what food is out there, and
absolutely,
what it can do for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said there. And so I think there's some great ways we can kind of tell people that foods that can help with gut health in particular, and then we can talk about some foods that relate to stress. So foods that can help with our gut, like you said, you turned to a plant-based diet, which was really interesting. And it's kind of been shown in the research that that's one of the things. And the reason plant-based diet can be really good for people and their gut health is it's high in fiber. Mm-hmm. And so our body's not good at digesting fiber. So when it doesn't get digested and broken down, the things that can help to break it down are our bacteria, our good bacteria.
Right.
So the good bacteria in the gut can break that down. And when it breaks it down, it becomes food for our bacteria. And so that food for the bacteria makes the bacteria grow, which increases our gut supply, which then we are in a healthier state because of it. The gut is. And so eating a diverse amount of food can really help. So you want a lot of different types of food in your diet. I think a big thing that they've shown in terms of gut health is the Western diet, and we're going to call it that, that's a little higher in fat, a little higher in sugar, isn't very diverse. And when they compare that to rural regions, in the world, like they've compared it to rural regions in South America and Africa, their gut health is much, much better. And so it's something we can kind of learn is the more types of food we have and the variety that we have, the stronger our gut bacteria is, because it's forcing to have to deal with different kinds of things and break down different things. So making sure that our gut in our food is very, very diverse. Fruits and vegetables, like we said, that are high in fiber are going to be very helpful. Legumes are another one because they're also high in fiber. So legumes, for people who aren't sure what those are, or they've heard of them, I feel like it's a word that's thrown around. But
it is. You're right. Yeah.
So it's like beans, lentils, things like that. Kidney beans especially are related to kind of mental health as well because they have high serotonin levels. So eating,
really? That I did not know.
Can be helpful. And then we know that apples, blueberries, I think artichokes, almonds, pistachios, those also can release a certain type of neurotransmitter that helps with inflammation as well. So it helps to decrease the amount of inflammation in our body through our gut. So there's a lot of different types of fruits and vegetables to turn to. Again, eat the rainbow. The more colorful it is, the more diverse it is, the better. The probiotics, like I mentioned, you can get those in supplement form, which I think is probably the most common way we see it. But you can also get that through food. So all the yogurts these days, if you see yogurt, there's a probiotic kind of label on it now, because that's a cool thing to mention, because now we know how good probiotics are for our health, and they help to keep the bacteria in our gut alive. And so look for yogurt. I think the biggest thing with yogurt is plain yogurt. Natural yogurt is going to be the best. So ones that are high in sugars and things like that aren't necessarily going to provide the same health benefits. And artificial sweeteners can decrease our gut bacteria a little bit. So watching kind of, if you can tolerate the plain side and transition to the plain side, or maybe you add fresh fruit or some nuts or seeds to it to kind of give some flavor, that's going to be your best option in terms of eating yogurt for the probiotics. And then like fermented foods, and some people really like them. Some people don't, like sauerkraut, kimchi, things like that are a great option. And then another big one is prebiotics. And we don't talk about those quite as much, but prebiotics tend to be, they're not easily digested. So again, they help to the gut have to break them down, and then forces it to grow. And so it's usually just high fiber foods end up being in like the prebiotic category. And so we think of like sweet potatoes or Jerusalem artichokes or oats or bananas, things like that. So kind of like an overall, those are the ones that specifically can help the gut. And there's so many more foods, and there are different strands of probiotics too. So again, talk to a dietitian if you're not sure, or talk to someone who specializes in this area so they can make a plan that works best for you if you want to learn more or kind of get something that's more specific in nature.
Yeah, reach out. That's something I'm still trying to do a better job of and finding out. But yeah, like the probiotics, I'm actually in between some. It's one of those things where I was taking it, I think I ran out, and then you forget about it for a while. And this talk is like, I need to go back and research that a little more because it's worth the money, but I want to make sure I'm buying one that actually has in it what it says it does. Because I think it goes back to, sourcing your food, knowing what's in your food. About the yogurt too. Like, okay, yogurt's great, but the high sugar ones, like my husband loves to use the plain yogurt as sour cream. He uses actually sour cream on things, and that's how he eats it. Or like smoothies. You can put it in smoothies too. That's another way to get some of those. So anyone who's really trying to embark on adding more fruits and vegetables, I highly recommend smoothies because that's one way to get it quickly.
I agree completely. And I think that was a great point. Kind of, you don't have to, you can mask stuff, like just kind of figure out where you can sneak stuff in and make it work for you. And I think I was also going to say, in terms of the probiotics, different people feel better with certain ones because, again, some people are lacking in certain bacteria, not all bacteria. So sometimes it can take a few tries to find the probiotics that work best and feel good for you.
Oh, absolutely. Some of those things I tried, it didn't work. Okay, you tried one, so it's hard. It takes, research or time, which I know time is always something that's, hard to come by, but take your time. You might find that it works better, and start slowly with nutrition. I know I've heard start on the outside of the grocery store, try to stay on the outside to find some things and just see how you feel. Add small things at a time and, wash it well. It's not part of the podcast, but I'm just going to say that.
Actually, that is a great thing.
Oh, okay.
Because when pesticides break down some of our natural bacteria in our gut. So natural whole foods, knowing where it comes from becomes important, and washing foods can become important to take some of that off.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I love Bytable and what they're all about and what they're doing, because I think it's so important. I buy all of these foods and I feel like I'm doing a decent job to what I can do, but I know you can be better. Like I'm washing them. I make sure that they're soaked. I look up all these different ways to wash them, and you can see what comes off of those. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, like my middle son, he's obsessed with grapes. He's asked for grapes for Christmas before. He asked him what he wants to eat. He wants grapes, strawberries, or bananas. I'm like, that's great, Beb, but we need a little more in your body. Like, I love that you go towards that, but it cracks me up until he'll try to sneak one before I wash it. I'm like, stop. Plus I want to cut him too fast, but I'm like, do not eat that. I really want to make sure it's washed. And I think a few years ago, I may not have cared so much, but the more research I've done and things I've come across, I'm like, we have to wash this, not to mention what's on it, but also how many people have touched it in this grocery store. You're like, thank you, I'll wash your hands, but there's kids, there's,
and you're picking to find the ripe one or the correct firmness. So you're absolutely right.
So many people have touched it. So we've talked a lot about foods that can influence stress in a positive way. What about some foods, and I'm sure we can kind of guess, that influence stress in a negative way?
Yep. So I think it's going back to kind of like the more processed foods, the ones really high in sugar, the ones high in fat, that kind of can cause that cyclical effect. They make us feel good, so then we keep eating them. And alcohol and drug use sometimes goes up during times of stress because it's something that helps to bring us down. Yes. It kind of just helps us to manage around us because the brain then is everything slowing down. And so it's not kind of processing quite as much. So those levels can go up. And certainly we know then when the amount we're intaking of alcohol isn't necessarily healthy. Could be another podcast, but we don't have to talk about it. We just kind of intuitively know that. The other thing is caffeine. Like, because during stressful times we don't sleep as well, or we might not sleep as well or get as much sleep, we turn to caffeine to kind of fuel us a lot. And so there can be benefits to coffee in terms of gut health. But at the same time, you want to monitor how much you're actually intaking, because we can just use that to fuel us and go. Right. So I'd say those. I think another one is just like the habit of eating. So if you are aware in your stressful times, like that you are turning to these quicker, faster foods because it's just easier and more convenient, it's evaluating how can I create snacks or make food choices that are convenient, that I can turn to, that are a little bit healthier than these quick fast foods that we think of that are a little more processed or have bad foods in it. So I think it's kind of on the front end, creating like an environment that's less stressful by meal prep, by making on-the-go snacks that are already packaged and all you have to do is grab them or keep your emergency stash in your bag or things like that. We can do that ahead of time so we don't go down this cycle of bad foods. And then I think the other one is just eating regularly. So again, if our blood sugar levels drop, because like we talked about before, we turn to our fuels and our blood sugars when we're stressed because we need them, because we might be ready to go. If that's happening all the time, we might get these dips and drops in our blood sugar levels. And this becomes super important, I think, for people who are diabetic or pre-diabetic. The impact that fluctuating blood sugars can have on fatigue and their overall health becomes super, super important. So recognizing and eating regularly and good foods for our blood sugar becomes important so we don't have these cyclical dips, and especially when it's so important on your overall health, like if you have diabetes.
Oh, absolutely. And there's diabetes in my family, type 1 and type 2. So it's definitely something that's important in finding ways maybe to find those healthier foods to help regulate that. And for those that, fortunately aren't dealing with that, it's, eating regularly nutritious foods. But I noticed with me, my water intake, I try to be really good about my water. I really do. But there are times where I'm working and I didn't get a chance to fill up my water again. So now I'm in the classroom for a few hours, and I can't walk away to go fill up my water. And I notice how hungry I feel. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm really hungry today. And I think back to my water. I'm like, oh, because I've been eating, too different, but I'm like, I need to drink some water in there with after my meal, just to make sure it's, not sending different signals. Just being healthy for my body so I don't, feel that extra stress. And I think it's just knowing your body, like,
absolutely.
Like different fast foods should not make you feel that good. It feels good while you're eating it, but how do you feel after? Take that in consideration. I never feel guilty when I have, especially if I'm able to make my own hummus. I never feel guilty after having some hummus and broccoli and some beans. I never feel guilty afterwards. So that says something. I'm actually kind of proud of myself. I'm like, okay, that was good. So how do you feel after you eat the food too? Probably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that kind of with stress too, especially when it's environmental stress and there's so much going on and you feel like you have to be everywhere and you don't have time, you might not even be mindful enough to recognize that you don't feel good after you eat it. And so I think that's where mindfulness with eating and just kind of nothing's so important that you can't spare 30 seconds to a minute, right? So if you could just slow down a little the food you're eating right after and kind of appreciate, how am I feeling? It can help direct food choice too, because then you might recognize, wow, I just really don't feel good. But when you do live in that heightened state of chaos all the time, you're not going to recognize that you don't feel good because it is your normal or your perceived normal. And so I think sometimes that becomes difficult for people. And so slowing down eating, paying attention to texture, to taste, to smell, and purposely just when you bite in, what did I feel? Like forcing yourself to ask those questions while you eat can just help us slow it down, which might help people get directed during food choices.
Right. And that's interesting. I'm thinking back, you brought up beans and legumes when I was talking about my diet. Obviously, that has to be a big part of my lifestyle with what I'm choosing to do for my body. But a couple of years ago, you told me I was eating beans. And I'm like, no, not happening. I didn't like beans. But I realized because I liked everything else better. And it was all these foods that weren't good for me that I chose over it. So I kind of chose to be mindful of why don't I like these beans. I think it was more because I liked the unhealthier foods better for it. Like, I'm going to go to this Mexican restaurant. I don't want beans. I want, the really greasy meat that they serve. Obviously you can make much better meat at home, especially if you look into it. But yeah, it's like I paid attention in that way because I'm like, no, I need to do this for me. And I eat them all the time. So it's just, finding out why you don't like certain foods or why you do like certain foods and what's drawing you towards them. It may not, obviously the taste is great, but is it because you're stressed? Is it because you can run through the drive-through? Is it because you don't have anything at home? Because I know I've done that. I'm driving home and I don't have time. I'm like, I'd love to stop. But I'm like, there's nowhere that I can stop that I know I'm going to feel good about. So I go home, but I never used to. I would stop before in a heartbeat, and it's hard, people. It's hard.
Yeah, that's why, like you said, tackle it one thing at a time. Don't try to make all these changes at once. And I love that you said, find what works for you, find what you don't like about stuff, and then you can find them. I think it's easier then to find the middle ground. So like your husband with yogurt, like I do the same thing. I use it as my substitute for sour cream, and it was like, why do I like sour cream so much? And it's like, okay, I like the tang it brings to the meal, so that's why I like it. Yogurt, you can start to convince yourself. You start with a small dollop and it's like, okay, this is giving some tang to it. I don't recognize that it's not sour cream. So you can do it that way. Or if it's the grease and the fat from the food that feels satiating, like when you're eating meat, maybe you then turn to like avocado on a lean meat, which still has fat. So it's going to give that feeling of satiety, but it's not going to be a trans fat that's bad for you. So there's different substitutes that you can kind of find once you know your likes and your dislikes.
Avocado. Love me some avocado. And I'm so happy my youngest does too, because I just try to feed her everything I'm eating. Because it starts, my boys are a work in progress. I wish I would have been eating this way when they were little. I think it would have been easier. But yeah, she had some quinoa, black beans, and avocado the other day. I'm like, you go.
Love it. That's awesome.
And my boys are like, what is she eating? Ew, is that real food? I'm like, oh, I failed you when you call that real food and you say that.
And one thing to say, and I want like people who are thinking about having kids or still in the process of having kids, like and we know this intuitively, what the mom eats is very important, but it also, because of that connection, it starts to form the baby's gut health too. and some of these other things we've talked about. So being really proactive prenatally and before you even have a kid is going to set your kid up for better gut health, for exposure to these different foods where they don't have then a say where I don't like this or things like that because they've been exposed. And so there is a really strong connection between what we choose to eat, and it happens before the kid's even around, which is crazy to think, but it happens before that even happens.
And I wish I would have read more of the research on that, or maybe, I just don't think not that I didn't care. I knew I should be healthy, but I mean, great job. My youngest, I ate really well for the most part when I was pregnant with her and even, a little bit before. And then my poor boys, I'm like, I could get stressed about that, but I'm like, you know what? There's not much I can do about it now. I can't turn back now. All I can do is, in the future going forward, I just keep trying to introduce them to new foods, and they have to keep trying it because they're going to be kids that have to try a lot of it. Like fruit, great. Vegetables, that's a work in progress. So, but like I said, I'm not going to stress about it because it's not going to help me on this podcast about stress, because that's very easy to do, to feel mom guilt on many different things. But like I said, moving forward, what can I do? I think it's just, being proactive now, problem solving. So what other tips do you have for stress management to improve health that you use or that you've read about?
Yeah, so I think it's bringing consistency and control to our lives. So like I said before, stress is a reaction to a situation or circumstances. So it's what do I know that bothers me, and how can I kind of control my environment a little bit better so I don't have to deal with those things. So for me, like I mentioned before, meal prep is a big one. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, because I'm a physical therapist and I work with people experiencing pain, a big thing is, well, why are you generating muscle tension here? Like, what is putting you on guard here? And so breathing techniques are a big part of my practice, and kind of teaching people how to breathe and how to control their muscle system and their tension system, so they're not perceiving stress and they're not afraid of moving and doing these other things. So breathing techniques. I know Maggie's podcast, I don't know if hers was number 4, but Maggie Gelson's podcast was talking about going through traumatic experiences and kind of working through them with a therapist and stuff. And I think that's so important, because the way we perceive threats can change after we've been through something very difficult. And so stress can become a more elevated situation. So talking to people, getting a support group for us mentally, like we talked about, turning to friends and family is really good. Meditation. I like to meditate. I'm a calmful meditator, just for a few moments a day. But there's also this phenomenon called active meditation. And I think sometimes when people try to meditate and calm themselves down, they start thinking of everything because it's like a calm situation. And then they're stressed. They start to get stressed that they're not meditating and they're not in a calm state. And so there's this idea of active meditation where you let everything out. So people will make noises, they'll do crazy movements, they'll scream, they'll just kind of let everything that they're feeling kind of come out of them for 2 or 3 minutes. And that can bring them down, because then everything tension-wise that they were holding on to, they had a release for. And so sometimes I've done that with my kids who are afraid to move after an injury or are stressed after an injury. I have them go in their car. They do it. No one's by them. No one's right. And they're like, oh, I meditated and now I feel great. So there's different things for different people. Journaling before bed is what I do, because I'm the night stress thinker. So I write down everything that's on my brain, just in list form, like everything that's bothering me. I finish with 3 things I'm grateful for, and then I put it away. And then I just go to sleep, and it works for me. Might not work for everyone, but there's so many strategies, and it's finding the things that work. Exercising is a huge one. We know it releases so many good hormones in our body. It makes us feel good. It's good for our health. So exercise and keeping that in, and finding the exercise that you enjoy, so you're not stressed that you're exercising and you don't
No, I love how you said, write down everything that's bothering you, but then you ended with things that are going well, because it just puts that positive spin before you go to bed. So I think that's important too. So the big takeaways I think I took from today was basically nutrition's a big one. But I think there's other things that need to be taken care of sometimes before nutrition, because I think sometimes it's hard to even go down that path of focusing on your food when you haven't taken care of what's sending you to the foods that are affecting your gut health and affecting your stress. So, try these strategies that you spoke about, that Sherilyn Nicholas talked about, and Maggie Gelson. Because like I said, stress affects everything, and it's so important to get that nutrition under control and for the gut health and everything else. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I think just when you are feeling stressed, if it's non-emergent, take a step back, figure out why it's bothering you. Like sometimes we need to really kind of dig deep and figure out why we're putting the pressure on ourselves or the demand that we feel from whatever the situation is, and kind of work through that. If we can get to the thing that's causing us to feel worry about it, it becomes much easier then to find the kind of direction you want to go. And then you can turn to these strategies of these other supplements so you can be really well-rounded in managing your stress. But kind of for non-emergent stuff, figure out your triggers and why they're triggering you. And then you can turn to your support group and things like that. Because I agree, nutrition is just one piece of the puzzle. There's so many other things. And so it's tackling the things that seem most eminent to you. So if nutrition's the issue, that's the thing you'll tackle. But if it's not as much of the issue and you're noticing it's more a social thing, then you have to address that social thing too. So it's kind of directing and figuring out what's causing your stress.
Right. It's important to take care of all aspects of life because there's many things that go into it, and how can you best do that? Like I said, reach out or you look after people in your life that you feel could be, dealing with stress in a more negative way, and they're having a hard time coming down from it. Because I think it's important to not just worry about ourselves, but you have to worry about yourself, and you have to say no to things, but keep a close eye on the people you're close to.
Absolutely. And it feels good. It feels good to help. Then it not only helps them, but it helps us. It's such a beautiful relationship that we have as humans, that we can have that effect on people and help them get through things. But it also heals us as well. So it's this really cool dynamic that we should take advantage of.
I agree. And it's like this, I'm glad I found you. I've learned a lot. So, we have that beautiful relationship too. So
yes, thank you.
No, I had fun talking to you today about the stress, and I have many things that I'm going to keep working on to help me with that, because we can always do better. Always.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. See you later.
All right. Bye.